All right, this is the follow up, and we are following up today on a live video I did a couple weeks ago, which was entitled Stuff and Sounds featuring Frank Canino. My guest today on the follow up is the great Larry Saltzman. Larry, thanks so much for making yourself available today, and welcome to the follow up.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right. So, for those listening, for those watching, Larry and I are part of the band at Into Proud, Life and Times of the Temptations, a Broadway show that, of course, due to the pandemic and due to COVID-19, has been shut down for the time being. And as such, I am very, very glad that Larry took the time today and talked to me about stuff because if anybody who has watched the live or has listened to the live video knows the name Larry Saltzman came up quite a bit during the live video. According to Frank, who was at Mikkel's at this famed music club on the Upper West Side, there were only two people who were at Mikkel's when stuff played more often or at the same time than himself, and one of them is Larry Saltzman. The other one is Paul Schaefer, who I'm still trying to get in touch with. So Larry, let's get right into it. The the premise of the follow up videos is to give a different perspective on a subject that already was discussed in the live videos. Now, this subject, of course, is the band stuff, right? And the scene that they had at Mikkel's, where they played a lot of their live shows. And since you were there with all of those live shows, with a lot of them, why don't you take us back to being on the Upper West Side? It's the late 70s, the early 80s, and you go in and check out this band. Maybe start with how did you hear about it, first of all?
It's a great place to start for me. So this is how it happened. Myself and my musician buddies were living out in Queens, and I'm a lifelong New Yorker, originally
Right.
from Queens, from the Flushing area. And we were kind of like late teenage years, and we were just I don't know, we were music fanatics, like all of us musicians
Okay. That's
were.
yeah, that's what we do, right?
That's what we do. And I had the benefit of having an older sister who was a pretty serious record collector.
Right.
And she had a musician boyfriend who was a bass player, was really,
Mm-hmm.
really good, who was a couple of years older than her. She was 5 years older than me, and Gary was 2 or 3 years older than her. And he also was like a wicked record collector.
Okay.
And I also had an older brother who had a job in a recording studio
Oh
in New
wow.
York.
Oh
Kind of
wow.
my older brother who kind of couldn't find his way in the world, but wanted to be a recording engineer and knocked on doors. And yes, late 70s, knocked on doors
Right.
and got a gig and became a recording engineer. So it's like, so I,
Incredible.
it was incredible. I knew something about the scene in New York City, but basically, as relates to stuff, and it's really quite a story. Um, so, what did we do? Because there was no internet
Mm-hmm.
and there was no cable TV,
Right.
and
Right.
New
Right.
York City at the time had a few channels on, had a really good radio stations. But
Right.
basically, I did what I'm sure you did, and we all did, which is I listened to records
Yeah.
and I held the record in my hand and stared at the record jacket, and
The liner notes.
the
Yeah.
liner notes and the
Yeah.
personnel, and I memorized the names,
Right.
and because again I had an older brother who was in the business, so he would and he worked at a recording studio that was on Seventh Avenue, and so he would come home with stories about Bernard Purdy
Wow.
and about Chuck Rainey and Gordon Edwards and so
Right.
on and so forth. And this is actually around the time I met Francisco
Okay.
because since my older brother, Francisco Santano, since my older
Right.
brother had the key to the recording studio, we could go in and record things. And that's where I met Francisco. And he must have been like 16 years old
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and, started to do sessions and stuff like that. So certainly, as a guitar player, I'll start with Cornell Dupree. It's close to my heart,
Mm-hmm.
and Cornell played on "Respect" by Aretha
Right.
Franklin. He played the famous guitar intro. We didn't really know it was Cornell because at that point, we were like 14 years old. Plus, there were no liner notes on a
Right.
single, but we
Right.
knew how big that was.
Right.
Um, the other record that he did in the late 60s, I mean, he was known as Mr. 2500 because allegedly, and it's
Mm.
not, I don't say allegedly, he played on 2500 albums, Cornell Dupree.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah. I
staggering.
don't doubt it. Yeah.
Um, Rainy Night in Georgia by Brooke Benton was like a landmark thing that he did in the
Right.
late 60s that really had his style. The thing that turned me on to Cornell, really, that's solidly got me there, was the Aretha record, Young, Gifted, and Black,
Mm.
particularly the song Daydreamin'.
Mm.
It's a big hit
Yeah.
on the radio in New York. You couldn't avoid it, and you wouldn't
Oh yeah.
want to avoid it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And this was one of the things, George, and I know you've been here, you've been what I'm going to say, you've been there.
Yeah.
I heard it. I heard guitar playing that I never heard, the likes of which I never heard before in my life.
Right.
And the beautiful sliding little fourths and sixths. And
Mm.
I was talking about this the other day with somebody. He was in a duet with Aretha on this
Mm.
record over and over again. The two things I have on the playlist from this record are Daydreamin',
Yeah.
which blew my mind, and All the King's Horses,
Oh yeah.
which
Yeah.
blew my mind.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And it's outrageous because what he did with Aretha is she sang and he answered in his very inimitable
Yeah.
and astonishingly original Cornell Dupree way. It's
Right.
almost like
Right.
you would say, like, oh, BB King did that. He sang and then he answered himself.
Right.
But this was that kind of thing, but something else because the content of
Mm.
what he played, it's the sweetest sound known to man.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
heard Daydreaming. This sound of the sliding fourths on guitar was something that, and I've talked to David Spinoza about this because I asked David, who invented that? Who invented that? And
Mm.
I really think Cornell did. Um, so I got the record out and I listened to it and I learned it because just as I'm sure you did on bass, what is that sound? What is that interval? What's
Yeah.
making that happen? And I got really into that. And what else? Just from being around New York, we would go see, and again, I was 18, whatever. We'd see Purdy play. Purdy had a band, and he
Mm.
would play, for example, at Buddy Rich had a club called Buddy's Place,
Okay.
and this was all just word of mouth or looking at like the Village Voice newspaper, which is a weekly popular
Yeah.
paper, and you'd look at the list and Buddy's Place, or I'm sure everybody who played there was probably great. A lot of people I wasn't interested in, but then you'd see Bernard Purdy and his band,
Right.
and you'd head in from Queens and you'd go see Bernard Purdy, and there was Bernard Purdy front and center,
Holding court.
unbelievable, and
Yeah.
it was poetry. I don't know what else to say.
Right. Right.
Like,
Right. No, you're totally on point with that is concerned. I saw him a couple times now already, and it is poetry. It's poetry, and there are two things that come to mind, and I'm glad that you said that poetry, and the other thing that came to my mind when I hear him play is the machine.
yeah.
There's just no. It's like flip a switch and we go.
Yes.
And there's no turning off like this. That's it. It's right there. It's
But it's a machine of joy.
oh yeah, no,
You know, of
totally.
course.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I've had the luxury of playing with him a couple of times, and I am always amazed because to me, and still to this day, he plays with the enthusiasm of a 19-year-old. He
Yeah.
just does. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, for sure.
So I'm getting up to McKell's.
Yeah. No, take your time.
We knew about Purdy. When I say we, I mean me and my music buddies.
Yeah.
We knew about Purdy, and we knew about Cornell, and we knew about Chuck Rainey, because of these records, Live at the Fillmore West, Aretha Live at the Fillmore West, and King Curtis Live at the Fillmore West. And somebody had them and we passed them around. So we knew about that.
Mm.
And Purdy had already played on a big Hall & Oates hit, She's Gone, like gigantic, right?
That's Purdy on drums.
Yes, it is. And that was produced by Arif Mardin, and certainly Arif was partial, for good reason, to use Purdy and Cornell and Chuck.
You know who plays
I do,
bass on
Steve
that?
Gelton.
Steve Gelton. Yeah, Steve
Yeah.
the Fonz.
Though Gordon
crazy.
is on that record too. He's not on that cut, but Gordon Edwards is on that record as well. And the thing about Purdy, which was interesting, is that he had such a big influence. He played on all kinds of things, as you know. But for those who are watching, he played on obviously the incredible R&B records, but then he's on a Miles Davis record. Then he's on like a folk record. Then he's on a Nina Simone record.
Right.
Jeff Beck hired him, and I saw that show.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Beck and Wilbur Bascom and Purdy, and they opened up for the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which was Billy Cobham and John McLaughlin. And I always take flack for saying this, but this quartet of Jeff Beck and Purdy, Wilbur and Max Middleton, they blew the Mahavishnu Orchestra off the stage. I'm sorry. It was just so deep. And that's all I'll say. It was like...
No, I listen, dude, go for it. It's all good. Don't let me hold you back. I can totally hear that.
And I think it's astonishing, but not surprising actually, that Beck knew to hire Purdy. You know, Beck knew, and I think Purdy went to England and played on a Jeff Beck record at the time that like George Martin produced. But you know, Purdy was just still a force of nature. And then like somebody like Cat Stevens, like a real folk artist, would come to New York. They would hire Purdy, and they all had hits with Purdy. And Purdy played on Simon and Garfunkel records, and he, you know, it's too much, his discography. It's too many hits.
It's a lot,
and it starts in like 1960. So he was all over the place. We knew who Jerry Jamont was because of actually, he was the bass player, I think, in the King Curtis group at that point. Or you'd get a Roberta Flack record. There was Jerry Jamont, and so you know, we knew what we liked, and that's what we...
Right, and you had an idea of who the players were, right? I mean, you studied enough at this point, meaning read the liner notes, you know, compared notes, talked to people, etc., etc. You knew who the players were that you gravitated to.
Unquestionably, you know. And the club scene again. Like I remember around the same time, I went to see. Of all things, at Kenny's Castaways, which at that point was on the Upper East Side, I went to see Yoko Ono. Why did I go see Yoko Ono? Because her band was Rick Marotta, Gordon Edwards, David Spinoza, keyboard player called Kenny Asher, and that's who the band was.
I know that feeling.
Oh my God! And it was like basically you went there so that you could see them play like Ode to Billy Joe, play a couple of instrumental numbers, and they were fantastic. And then with that band, with Gordon and everybody, Yoko would come out and do her thing.
Wow.
Over that band. And that you had to just sort of like be in wonderment. You would look in wonderment. It's not why you came. You came to hear.
No, I get that. I totally. I mean, I've done it. I've definitely done it. Like I followed Anthony Jackson and Will Lee around, and you know, in every possible configuration that you know. I went to. I never knew. I knew peripherally about Michel Petrucciani, the great, you know, late piano player, but I really went to see him play. Because Anthony Jackson and Steve Gadd were in the rhythm section. I know that feeling. I've been there. Yeah.
Same thing, though. You know, Yoko is a little more.
Is a little more out there.
Avant-garde.
Yeah. No doubt.
So we were Cornell fans. We were Cornell fans again, based on Rainy Night in Georgia, based on Respect, based on all that kind of stuff. It's big. And Cornell got signed to Atlantic Records, and his first record for Atlantic Records was called Teasin'. And Atlantic Records used him on so many sessions, so many producers, there's so many hits.
Right.
So they recorded him.
Right.
And so what was this? It's like word of mouth. This was my friend Howie, my guitar player friend, calling me up and saying, or you'd read a review someplace that said Cornell Dupree teasing. You get a phone call. By the way, no, of course, no cell phones, none of
Right.
this stuff.
Right. Landline.
No
Old school.
emails. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get a phone call. Hey, I read that Cornell has a record out called Teasin'. So we run to the record store, we get Teasin', we listen to Teasin', and then again, somebody's looking at the Village Voice. Cornell's playing at the Bottom Line in 3 weeks. You immediately get tickets. And we went down to the Bottom Line and we watched Cornell. So this must have been the first time I saw Cornell live, though at that point I had already seen like a bunch of New York guitar players live, like Spinoza and Steve Kahn, who I actually studied with, and so on. We went down to the Bottom Line, a phenomenal band with Chuck Rainey and Purdy and T,
Right.
and Cornell.
Right.
We watched Cornell. What could you say? It was
This regulation. Yeah.
you know, it's like you never heard anything that good.
Yeah.
And then we waited for Cornell at the bar. We wanted to say thank you, right?
Yeah.
We had a little conversation with Cornell, and he was there with his wife Irma, and they were like inseparable. She was like a magnificent person, and I think she's still with us, actually. I hope so. And Cornell said, hey, "We're going out, walking to the car. Walk us to the car." So me and there's three of us,
Right.
We walk Cornell and Irma to the car, and we're just so happy to be. We're like puppy dogs, bouncing around Cornell on the sidewalk. Cornell's the coolest, and he's got his gig bag, and he's wearing a beautiful suit, and he just laid down the law.
Right.
And we said, as getting into the car, we said, "Hey, Cornell, when are you doing your next gig? When could we see you play again?"
Right.
And as he got in the car, he said, "You got to come to McKell's." He said, "We play at McKell's
All the time.
all the time. Boom, car door closes, drives away. The three of us are on the sidewalk. We say, What did he just say? Where are they playing? We didn't know what McKell's was. Three of us on the sidewalk. What did he just say? And one of us said, he said McHale's. He said he'd play at McHale's. What's McHale's?
Where is McHale's?
What is we thought he said McHale's, like an Irish bar.
Right.
Okay. Right. No internet. We got out the phone book. We got out the Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn. We called up the Yellow Pages. In every borough, George, there are several Irish bars called McHale's.
Of course, yeah.
Or at least there were.
Yeah.
We called up every Irish bar in the city and said, "What night is Cornell Dupree there?" And they're like, "Huh? What are you talking about?"
Who?
We're like, exactly. And we hit a dead end. And this was like a month. And then my friend Howie called me up and he said, "I got it. We're idiots." He said, "It wasn't McHale's." He said, "McHale's." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, 97th and Columbus. And he said, "I just got off the phone with them. They're there Tuesday through Thursday."
Yeah. Unbelievable.
So,
what a story.
So
what a story.
So we went.
Yeah.
Now, and I saw the great interview you did with Frank. And when we first went, it was not crowded.
Right.
It wasn't, and it wasn't empty.
Right.
But it was very, very comfortable to the point where we walked in. It was free to get in, as in zero.
Nothing. Yeah.
All you had to do is buy one drink. If the funds were a little tight, and you could nurse that drink the whole night. They didn't even care if you actually had the drink.
Yeah.
And you could sit in front of this band. And there was a small bandstand, and the preferred seating for the musicians was right in front of them. And I think, as Frank said, of course, acoustic piano.
Right.
There might have been a mic, an acoustic piano, and a really primitive PA system, like whatever they had at the time, a Shure Vocal Master or something.
Yeah.
The configuration of the Encyclopedia of Soul, and there was like a handwritten sign in the window that said Encyclopedia of Soul, Sunday through Thursday. Gordon Edwards bass, Cornell Dupree guitar, Christopher Parker drums, Richard T, Charlie Brown sax player.
Right.
And what happened from there? Well, I will quote my own sister, who went to see the band, not as much as I did because she had a life and had to be up early in the morning. But she said, her quote was, it ruined all other music for me. She said, because no other music after that could ever sound as good.
Yeah. I get it.
And my gosh. So we went there the first night. We stayed for every set. And basically we went back every time we could. We went several times a week. Frank and I say we went to music school together, and people hear us say that, and they say, "Well, you guys go to Berkeley?" No, we didn't go to Berkeley. But you go to Manhattan School? No, we didn't go to Manhattan School. You see, we went to McCall's. That's where we learned how to play music.
Yeah. I don't doubt it. That's a very real. That's a very, very real phenomenon. Yeah, I get it.
And particularly Cornell. I mean, they all did. I've also been quoted, and I will say it again. At the time, I would say to people that Gordon Edwards is my favorite musician on all instruments considered. That's my favorite guy. I just felt that way, and so Cornell was up there with him, and of course, these were guys who were unbelievably magnetic.
Yeah.
And each guy had such an incredible individual style.
Right.
And yet, when they played together with this band, the Encyclopedia of Soul, before they were Stuff, of course, it continued when they were Stuff, just a name change and a little personnel change here and there, which we'll get to. It all got surrendered to the purpose of the big picture.
Right.
And the big picture was somebody, well, a hellacious groove being laid down.
Right.
Unbelievable dynamics.
Right.
Like a complete masterclass, post PhD class in dynamics.
Right.
That came from Edwards.
Right.
Edwards was Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah, he was steering the ship. He was definitely driving the bus. Yeah.
And he, and I have some notes. I just wrote down some things because I want to forget certain things.
No, go for it.
He was the leader of the conductor. He controlled everything. He controlled the tempo, the feel, the dynamics, and it could be done with a breakdown, with the neck of the bass.
Right.
It was done very subtly. It could be done like with raising an eyebrow. It could be done with the volume at which he played, because sometimes he would play really, really soft, and everybody was so sensitive and so listening to each other.
Right.
And they were, needless to say, super confident, fantastic players. Right. They could play it whisper volume. And then bring it up and bring it up and bring it up. They could do that. I watched again the Live at Montreux '76. So that was done like a year sort of after what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I knew I remembered this, but I wanted to verify it. Almost never, and I would say never, but you can't say never in life. Almost never would anybody count in a song. Stuff never, ever started a song by going 1, 2, Didn't happen. A song started, and if you watch
Yeah, I know exactly what you're about to say.
if you watch Montreux, you will see it. They are like an incredible. I mean, I call them. You know, I'm a Beatles fan. I call them the Beatles of R&B. To me, they're,
Yeah, 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 fair
everybody that
enough.
shines. A song stopped, and the next song would begin
Yeah,
immediately,
yeah,
without a count. And they had. I never saw a set list, but they had it in their minds, I guess, what they were going to do. So the song could start, big ending, boom, and then Gordon's going boom, 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 boom,
right.
right? Or Gordon's going boom, 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 and everybody comes
Oh
in,
yeah,
right?
oh yeah,
Or
yeah.
T, if it's a T thing, T's starting off. He's in like rubato, Rhapsody in Blue Land.
Right.
Again, after the band just stopped, there's
Mm,
not even a nanosecond of silence after the band stopped, and T is doing his thing, and he's playing this beautiful.
mm,
It's magical arpeggiated rubato thing, and they're going to do something like "Feel Like Making Love,"
right,
and then boom, then he plays. He's like that, and then everybody falls in behind him. It's
right,
it's perfection. Or it's not. And Cornell plays, or Eric played, and
right.
that's how they were. They
Mm,
were they were they were just like that. So we're going night after night. It's just unbelievable what we're hearing, and you know the repertoire at this point, because this was before they had the record deal. They didn't really have any original songs, so it was cover
right.
songs, and they picked the greatest stuff. So they would do Stevie Wonder's "Boogie On Reggae Woman." And Gordon was like a country music fan. They
Yeah,
would
he
do
is. He is.
countryish things.
Yeah, and you hear
Um,
that. You hear that in his playing. That's a very, very interesting point you're bringing up, because like that album that you suggested, the John Lennon album,
yeah.
you definitely hear that influence in Gordon's playing.
You're
Oh
one
yeah.
five a lot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
How did you
yeah.
like his playing on that
Oh,
record?
I loved it. I
Isn't it
absolutely
incredible?
loved it. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I absolutely loved it. And it's like every note is with the ultimate intention. You know,
Yes.
there's like no um I think that he is West Indian. I think so, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I almost feel like with Jamaican musicians, with reggae musicians, like there's no wasted intent, right? Everything is distilled down to its bare essence. You don't waste intent, you don't waste dynamics, notes, rhythms, none of that, right? You play what's needed when it is needed. And I get that same sense from Gordon Edwards, where there is no wasted effort, right? It's if he needs to be virtuosic, he'll be virtuosic. If he needs to lay down and be in the cut, he'll be in the cut, you know. If one note is what is called for, then one note it is. But that one note gets the ultimate attention, right? So yeah, I get that. Like that John Lennon album, I forgot the title of it right now, but
Mind games.
Mind Games, exactly.
Yeah.
It absolutely, yeah, no
Uh,
doubt.
he saved that record. I mean, it's known as
Mm,
like not a great Lennon record. Some of the material's a little sketchy, whatever.
mm,
But Gordon, to me, we had a text exchange. I said he's the star of the record. He
yeah,
he
yeah,
saved he
yeah, yeah,
saved the
yeah.
record. And so they would do contemporary things that were like their antenna was up for all kinds of music that they would cover. So as Frank mentioned, by the time I get to Phoenix, they did that so beautifully.
Mm,
That's the Way of the World. They played a That's the Way of the World that, trust me, rivaled Earth, Wind, and Fire.
I
Trust me, as
got
great as Verdine is, and he's awesome, Gordon is 100%
just
authorized to play that
yes,
feel,
yes.
and they did "I'm Easy,"
Yeah,
the Commodore song. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they were into ballads like that. "Oh Happy Day," "Ode to Billy Joe." Some of that was held over maybe from King Curtis. Played
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like that kind of stuff. "Ode to Billy Joe." We said "Signed, Sealed, and Delivered." "Mercy, Mercy, Mercy." Their break song, which they would play always before going on a break, was Isley Brothers, "It's Your Thing." And you
Mm.
see that in Montreux also, and it's wicked fast. And Gordon's chops are incredible on that. It's like doom, 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 boom, doom, 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 doom. I can't even sing it as fast as he played it. I'm not even going to try. Um,
That's awesome.
so this is what's going on. and there's not that many people there. I remember one really rainy night, and if it rained, people didn't go out. But if it rained, we knew we're going in. You know,
Yeah, 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 for sure.
we're driving in. And our one night that I'm there, and there's like very few people there. Uh, Dave Sanborn came in. I didn't know. I knew who he was. I didn't know what he looked like.
Mm.
I just knew the sax player came up, and they all seemed to know him, and they all seemed to like him, and they played Up on the Roof,
Mm.
which I never heard them play before,
Wow.
and Up on the Roof blew the roof off the place,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the same night, a guy came in a rain slicker, and they all knew him. Got up on stage. I didn't know who this guy was, and he proceeded to do a really convincing Joe Cocker imitation, and he sang "A Little Help from My Friends," which they knew inside out because they played with Joe Cocker. You know, they
Right,
toured with Joe Cocker as a
right.
group. And this guy got off the stage and he went to the bar. And after the set, we went up to a guy in a yellow rain slicker,
Mm.
and we said, "Hey, that was great. You know, you sound just like Joe Cocker. Do you are you a musician?"
Mm.
He's like, "Yeah, yeah." It was nice. And I said, "But what? Do you just look like comedy stuff, or what?" Because he's funny. What do
Yeah.
you do? And he said, "No, no, no. I write songs. I write songs."
Okay,
And
out of
we
town.
said, you know, we said like, would we have heard of you? And he said, "Well, yeah, I got a couple of records out." He said, "But I'm working on one now, and Richard played on it, which is why you know, I came down. I wanted to hang with
Right,
Richard and see Richard play." It's like, what's your name?
right,
He said, we'll remember your name. Tell us your name. He said,
right.
"Yeah, I'm Billy Joel." And
That's
and
crazy.
the record that he was doing was The Stranger, which was going to be his breakthrough record. But
Right.
this was like, you know, right before that. So
Mm.
that's the kind of thing that was going on there.
Mm.
And Eric came in. So meaning Charlie Brown left for whatever reason I never knew,
Right, right.
and but I think he left on his own volition. These guys were all tight and
Yeah,
friends.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, you can't stay in one place forever. That's
No,
things happen. Things get moved around, people get moved around. It is what it is,
and then as you said, then Eric came in, and then it was complete guitar heaven,
Yeah.
and and they proceeded that way um, until Steve Gadd would sub for Chris Parker, and then the next evolution in that step was the two drummers
Right,
together.
right, right.
So now, in terms of, and I want to read something
Yeah, yeah.
because what happened is that everything is going along just great, George, and we're going to McKell's and we're paying zero to get in, and night after night we're getting like a master class in. And I also don't want to make it sound like it was like an intellectual
Yeah,
exercise.
no, you were in there, heart and soul and mind and everything. Yeah, 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 yeah. I
Out
get it.
about minds. We couldn't believe what we were hearing, And I literally remember one night I had, and I wasn't. There were no drugs involved. There was a
Mm.
Heineken involved, but no drugs. But I remember one night the way they played. They would sometimes cover one of the instrumental Barry White things, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember literally the way the time was being played on this Barry White song they were doing. I felt the earth shift on its axis somehow. My relationship to the actual freaking planet and gravity changed based on the time feel that they had,
Yeah, yeah.
and but this is what happened. So everything is going along really, really great, and then I get a phone call from my friend Howie one day, and he said, "Uh-oh." I said, "What?" We're going like Canino said, we're going.
Yeah,
If they're playing Sunday through Thursday, we're going every night we can. We're going
yeah,
there's no. We're sitting home in Queens. It's like,
yep.
and it would be on the late side. It's like we'd get in the car, so we'd like between the three or four of us, it would go, or two of us,
Mm-hmm.
somebody would have a car. We drive in at like 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably awesome. And so Howie called me up and he said, "Uh-oh," and I said, "What?" And he said, Village Voice, page, 32. I was like, what? He said, well, let me read it to you.
Oh,
And it
damn.
says, I'm going to read it, for real,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
all of it, but parts of it. It says, riffs, Joe Cocker consults the soul doctors.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
there's a
see it.
picture of Joe and Gordon,
And
right?
Gordon right there, yeah.
Yeah. And Howie, my dear friend, he was a few years older than me. He knew even more about Cornell and Cornell's history than I did. And of course, by the way, Cornell and Hendrix played together in the King Curtis group, which is
That's
and his
mind
pictures.
blowing. Yeah.
His pictures.
Yeah.
So this is written by a guy named Perry Mizell in The Voice. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs because he says it really well.
Yeah.
And when people say, what was the scene like? This, in a weird way, says it kind of beautifully by a professional. He was a English professor at NYU. So, and mostly the article, a lot of the article, not mostly, but the article is sort of about, Joe Cocker being there, but it's not. The article is about Joe Cocker consults the soul doctors. So here's what it says. It's nothing less than a who's who of soul session land, past and present. Guitarists Cornell Dupree and Eric Gale, bassist and band leader Gordon Edwards, drummers Steve Gadd and Chris Parker, and keyboardist Richard T. These original doctors of sound have been playing for years in the studio behind a list of collective credits that bulges as big as the eye that reads it. Aretha Franklin, Jackie Wilson, King Curtis, David Ruffin, the Stylistics, Diana Ross, Freddie Hubbard, Stanley Turrentine, blah, blah, blah. These are the true heroes of the last decade of American pop music. Add to the names of Chuck Rainey, Gerald, Gerald, Jermott, Jerry, as we knew, right? Roger Hawkins, of course, is a great drummer from down at
Shoals.
Yep. Bernard Purdy, for starters, and they've gone largely unnoticed. If you remember what Memphis Soul Stew sounded like, then you've got a pretty fair idea of what these guys sound like now. They've been digging that loose, pumping groove every weeknight at McKell's for the last 6 months, and on and off for a year or so before that. They come in after full days in the studio downtown, and they come in to play, jamming mostly on soul standards like Signed, Sealed, Delivered, Heard It Through the Grapevine. The secret of the, listen to this, the secret of the sound lies where you'd least expect it, in the silence and space that lets the melody breathe through the beat. Gordon Edwards likes to compare the strategy to the way defensive linemen block and open up spaces for the ball carrier. Quote, "We may not score ourselves," he says, laughing, "but we're always on the winning side." It's a little bit more. But even in a crew this heavy, it's Cornell Dupree who threatens to steal the show. Perched high and cool on his swivel seat at the rear of the bandstand with his pipe curling blue flames around his head, Cornell lays claim to a consummate definition of sweet soul guitar. He breaks your heart the way he breaks the beat, splitting and stuttering double-stopped chords over the back of the rhythm with a lazy restraint that puts all but the Croppers and the Bensons on permanent notice that his is the last word on the subject of soul. It's taken some time for most of us to realize that the rock music that blew our minds in the 60s was in many ways an interpretation of the kind of music these guys have been playing all their lives. And then finally, he talks a little bit about Cocker, and he gives a plug to Cocker, the writer. He says, if you're lucky, you can catch Cocker with the band tonight or tomorrow, February 25th, 26th, so right around this time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
At McKell's. And then there's a quote from Cornell, which is, quote, "We'll probably be here," says Cornell Dupree, "till a half hour before the plane leaves." And the reason why Cocker was coming down was because they were rehearsing with him during the day. They were going to do these dates with Joe Cocker. So, I mean, if that doesn't, explain it, I have another great thing I want to read, which is Wexler, Jerry Wexler, the great Atlantic Records producer. This is so great about Cornell. This is from his liner notes to Cornell's record, which was called Bop and Blues.
Mm.
And this is a word for word quote, liner notes from Wexler. It was our practice, and Wexler produced the Aretha Franklin stuff, and
Oh yeah.
gigantic. Quote, it was our practice to use 3 or even more guitarists on a record session. Time and time again, what we would get into was a hellacious mess as the 3 guitarists got in each other's way. So when Dupree, the pride of Fort Worth, came to our rescue, it was bye-bye to multiple guitarists, because miraculously, it seemed to me, one man playing rhythm and lead at the same time took the place of 3.
Check that out.
And a quote from Edwards. He said, this is again from Guitar Player magazine quote. He said, quote, pianos were rough in those days. Most of the time, half the keys were gone. And if they weren't, they were all out of tune. With Cornell, I could fire the piano player because Cornell played chords and melody at the same time. We played on stage just like we played behind the artist. If we laid down a groove in bar 1, by bar 955, we were still playing that same groove.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And finally, we never stepped on each other's toes. It was like a polite conversation. Well, it was. Yeah, I guess it was a polite conversation between master poets again.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, the one thing that one thing that really stands out with stuff is the division of labor between Eric Gale and Cornell Dupree, right? That division is unparalleled. So maybe the 3 Motown guitar players, had something like that, But even in my opinion, and again, this is highly subjective. This is highly, this is totally individual take on this. But my individual take, like on the West Coast, you couldn't find that. You had multiple guitars, but they were all arranged in multiple ways, right? They were all like, they had one mastermind saying, okay, you do this, and you do that. Whereas with Eric Gale and Cornell, they thought that way, right? They kind of had that, they came up with that by themselves. They didn't need anyone telling them what to do. Same with the 3 guitar players in Detroit, in Motown. So that, and interestingly enough, my introduction to stuff was via Eric Gale, because Eric Gale played on a lot of CTI records, and Art made a CTI record. He made several CTI records, but one of them is called Crawl Space. And that was my introduction to Eric Gale, because he is the guitar player on that one, together with Steve Gadd on drums, by the way. So that was one thing that I also kind of wanted to talk about, because it came up during the live video, and I wanted to hear your take on it. What I find fascinating about stuff was that the band itself could break off into these small into these small units, right? Be it Eric Gale and Steve Gadd doing a session over here, or Steve Gadd and Cornell Dupree doing a session over here, or Gordon and Steve Gadd doing a session, without the others, or Richard T and Steve Gadd playing behind, and Gordon Edwards playing behind Paul Simon. And the minute it's just the 2 of them, it's not the entire unit, it still sounds like stuff. Yeah. And that is, that I don't know any other entity in music history that I can't think of anybody else who had that. How did that come about? What's your take on that?
Well, George, it comes down to I think the personalities were there. Every personality was so strong. Like I know you're a Who fan, for example.
Oh yeah.
And so it's the same thing with them. It's like Entwistle had such a voice, Moon had such a voice, and Pete, but even more so, they all had such original voices. And I think that's why in any combination, you heard the the essence.
Right.
And what you said is really true. And there were examples of that. There's like Gone at Last was the Paul Simon signal with Phoebe Snow, right? And
Exactly.
that's just Grady Tate and Edwards, Gordon Edwards, and Richard T.
Right.
And that's magnificent, right?
Yeah.
Then you have another thing where like Paul Simon, these are on my little Spotify playlist. Paul Simon's song "Tenderness," which has classic Cornell, also has Edwards, and I'm pretty sure T's on that also. But you're absolutely right. Then you could have a thing that was just like Eric and Cornell, and it sounded, or oh, what about the thing? What about the incredible Tom Scott live from the Big Apple, whatever it's called,
Yeah.
right? Which has T
Right.
and Eric.
Right.
And other people, Hugh McCracken and Gad is on that too, and Marcus.
Right.
But it still sounds like stuff because this is, I guess, what I'm trying to say is any of these guys, the ingredient was so strong that if the ingredient of the cooking was so strong, the ingredient of Chris, honestly, or Steve, T, Eric, Cornell, Gordon, it was so strong that it was identifiable, very identifiable when it was removed from the dish. But the amazing thing is that somehow when you put the dish of stuff together, it was just the most delicious dish ever in the world. So in that case, it wasn't like, oh, well, this flavor is overpowering. Right. And I think it came from listening to each other so deeply and a real respect for each other. There's another thing. This is like extra musical stuff, or maybe it's not, I don't know. But I was thinking the other day also, when we would sit, we had the benefit and to sit 5 feet away from these guys.
Right.
Gordon would play and would stare out into space as if looking at something on the horizon, some magnificent something, some godlike thing. And Eric was the same way. Eric would like chopping wood, playing rhythm guitar. He had a very definitive quarter note kind of thing. He did a lot of different things, but that was one thing that he did. And also he was hypnotized,
right,
by, or just so deeply into it, so deeply in the moment. Right. But every once in a while something would happen that would raise somebody's eyebrow. But generally, I mean, it's funny, it's like you could imagine like a fantastic sports team and they're very successful and they love each other, but then they get in the dugout afterwards. They don't say like, that double play you made was a monster, and I got the same feeling about these guys. Like I don't think T went up to Eric Hale and said, "I love this solo you played." No, they didn't have to. They were family.
Right.
And they all knew how great they were. And T, I'm sure, and T got hired and made a lot. Like Peter Gabriel would come into town, and T would be on "In Your Eyes," or something else on the Peter Gabriel. Well, how did that happen? Peter Gabriel comes to New York to record, and either he comes to New York specifically to work with Richard T, probably, or somebody says to him, "Oh, you need a piano player. There's only one guy."
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Paul Simon is famous for calling, when he introduces Richard T, like the hands that built New York.
Yeah, and Paul treasured T, and all that. And T, a side comment. And by the way, all these guys were super skilled. T, I know people who hired T, worked, and they say he was an unbelievable sight reader. What the quote I remember is the person who hired him. We were saying, how was he doing how's his reading? It was a stupid question to ask. They said Richard T could sight read the flight of the bumblebee. Like, had incredible, and Cornell was a really good reader. They all were. They were super, super skilled. I think T really took care of himself financially, and he knew what he was worth, and he was getting triple scale, and he knew he had a unique thing, and I know he was also a sweet cat and a nice man, but he took care of himself. And one of the things when we were getting ready to do this, I was looking at this Carla Bley record that they played on because she was up in Woodstock, and Stuff had an association up in Woodstock. Maybe a couple of them had houses up there, and they played at a club called Joyous Lake. And Carla Bley, I'm not actually even that familiar with her, but she's like kind of avant-garde.
Oh yeah, she's very, very much out there. Out there in this modern, very, very modern avant-garde, out there jazz composer. Yeah.
They went to her and her husband or producer whatever, went to Joyous Lake, and they heard Stuff, and they were like, of course it was seductive. Anybody would want to hire them. And they why don't we hire these guys to be the rhythm section of the record?
Yeah.
And they didn't, and Carla didn't play. They just gave them charts and they cut the basic tracks. And Carla had asked T, he thought she was a female singer. So they were doing like a singer-songwriter record. He didn't know what it was, because they didn't explain to him what it was.
Yeah, of course.
Plus, he was doing so many sessions. It's like, and I read this interview with her, and she said this in a very nice way. She was not put off. She was kind of charmed. She asked T to play a solo, and he kind of said, which is totally legitimate, because Michael Brecker got a chunk of change to play a solo, as did Dave Sanborn. Right. And Richard, in his very businesslike but friendly, straight ahead way, say, that's extra,
Yeah.
But I mean, nobody ever begrudged him, because
what you got was so good.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say, this is my own personal baggage, but the people who were blessed to be there kind of early, or I'll say me, I became very protective in a weird way of them. And when I would hear somebody hire them to play a record, and it would be just like they hired all of them. And then it was just like, just add a singer and a song, and you have like $1 million worth of magic. And I would hear that. So an example of that is Carly Simon record, Boys in the Trees. And the song is You Belong to Me, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's all of Stuff. It's all of them.
Yep.
And Carly wrote a nice song, sang a nice vocal, but everything about that, and Arif Martin is a producer. It's just like, no, just call them in and show them the chord. I'm just going to write out chord changes for them. I'm not going to write out parts for them.
Right.
And it's like, just add magic water, or just add anything, and now you have like the magic of Stuff. And when that would happen, even when Gone at Last came out, I was like, but they're ripping off Richard. It's like, this is just,
how can this be? Yeah.
It's like the song is so enhanced by what Richard did. It's like Richard, but not really true in that case. Because look, of course, it's a song and there's lyrics, and Paul's a great songwriter. I would never take that away. But sometimes when I would hear them featured, I hope I didn't get into trouble for just saying what I said. But anyway,
I don't think so. What is he gonna come down to the West Village and be like, Mr. Saltzman, Mr. Simon wants to see you outside.
Yeah, no. I'm sure not. And Gone at Last is a great song. But I would say because there were a lot of examples back then of like the Stuff sound, just as you're saying.
No, I mean that is just noticeable. It is that is just a fact, and this you hear it in Art's album, in Crawl Space, which is that album where I first heard Eric Gale and Steve Gadd. I mean, you hear it in the that was my first definition of pocket, like what Steve Gadd is doing on that album. And then sort of the that sound has sort of stayed with me, and that feeling of pocket has stayed with me throughout my career. You hear it in Me and Julio Down in the Schoolyard. I mean, and that is again Eric, Steve Gadd, but Tony Levin on bass.
Oh, that is Late in the Evening.
Late in the Evening. Sorry, yeah. There you go. Late in the Evening. So, that's like, how is that even possible? Because you have very, very distinct players, right? Tony Levin doesn't sound like anybody else. There's just no way, no two ways about that. And yet it sounds like stuff. It could be Gordon playing. There's this absolutely, no doubt in my mind, and not taking anything away from the greatness of Tony Levin or anybody else for that matter. So it's just a phenomenon that I thought was really interesting to point out, and I'm glad that you feel that way too, especially since you've heard the band that many times.
Yeah.
I did have the great fortune to see Gordon play live a couple years ago. We were still living uptown, and they played at a place on 118th
Creole.
Street, Creole, exactly. So I did get to see him there and got introduced to him, and that was that was deep. I mean, that's just a that's a big moment somehow. This, you realize, oh, wait a second, this is, you hear the sound. What's the song, Shining Star from the Manhattans, right? That's Gordon on bass,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And whether you follow him, follow his entire career, or any of the other members of Stuff, for what it's worth, because it's not only one person. That sound somehow stays with you. I remember back in Vienna, I heard probably a tape of Richard T doing A Train, right? That famous duet that he does with Steve Gadd, right? And I mean, back then I didn't have the wherewithal to be like, what is this? This is incredible. But the minute you hear it, it stays with you because it's so strong and it's so distinctive that it almost sounds like you've heard it your entire life, yet you're hearing it for the first time. You see what I'm saying? Like this,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
that's just a weird, I don't know, a weird phenomenon with those players.
Yeah. Another thing I remember, just really briefly, also, I'm going to finish my story about
Yeah, yeah,
an
of course.
article came out in the Village Voice, and then like my friend Howie went down the next night. I didn't go down for that night, whatever. And he called me from a payphone. He said, "There's a line around the block. We're screwed." And all of a sudden, McKell's, God bless them, the owners, Pat and Mike McKell, they knew now, okay, well, the supply and demand, and they charged a very small fee, a buck or two
Mm,
to get in,
mm,
but
mm,
it was packed.
mm,
But the thing is, they knew us because we were there all the time, and they wouldn't have us wait on the line. They would say, "No,
Oh, check that out. How cool is that? I mean,
you know
and
what I'm saying?"
at that point, you're a late teenager, early 20s, and all of a sudden it's like, front of the line. You're
Yeah,
in,
no, it was so wonderful. And I remember my friend Ed, who was the keyboard player in our little group there, and he was obviously, every keyboard player was crazy about tea. And Don Grolnick was there one night,
oh yeah.
and we were like, on a break, everybody would go outside. In those days, you could still smoke in the club,
Oh
but
yeah.
people go outside and smoking. My friend Ed, and there was Grolnick, and Grolnick was considerable,
A force of
fantastic.
nature. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And my friend Ed went up to Don and said, and my friend Ed was a really good piano player, said, Don, I'm wondering, do you teach? And Don said to him, well, it depends. What do you want to learn?
yeah.
And my friend Ed said, well, actually, I kind of would like to learn about what Richard's doing. And Don said, I remember, Don said, oh my God. He said, oh, I can't teach that. He said, that's from in here. He said, that's from in here. And he was like in the process of leaving, like getting into a cab.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, that's from in here. In here. I can't teach that. And he was banging on his chest as he walked away from us to the cab, like, that's in here. That you can't teach that. That's in here. So, I absorbed a lot of Cornell, to say the least,
Oh yeah.
and to this day, George, I I kind of owe I owe everything to him. Not that I didn't have other influences, I do.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I owe everything to him, and even I, it informs so much of my thoughts
Yeah,
about
yeah, and
guitar.
the choices that you make when you play. I mean, yeah, of course, of course. No, I totally get that, and I hear that when you do play.
Oh, that's so kind of it.
This,
But
no, absolutely,
even when I'm playing something that's written out, like when I subbed at Memphis
right.
and sat
Oh
next
yeah,
to you,
yeah, yeah. That's where we met. Right, right.
even that, I'm trying to sound like the great John Putnam, and that's the gig. And that, if you don't do that, you're not gonna. But still, I would sit there and chuckle. It's like but then John's a fan of Cornell's too.
Well,
But I would sit there and chuckle. It's like everything I'm doing is completely informed by Cornell.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no
And
doubt. Funny thing is that me and Putnam, we went to see, like, when we were doing Memphis. Cornell was playing up at the Iridium, right? And it was Cornell and Buddy Williams was on drums. Frank Canino was playing bass, and what's the baritone player's name?
Ronnie Cuber.
Ronnie Cuber. Yes, exactly. So after finishing the show, Putnam and I would pack up and head on up to the Iridium and check out Cornell. And sure enough, like, there he was. One of his perhaps last years, one of the
Yes.
last years. So we wouldn't have missed it for the world. Like, that was like a major, like, we had to be there. We had to go there, right? There was just no two ways about that.
Yeah,
Um,
he Cornell reinvented the guitar. He did. He really
mm,
did. He played
mm,
things no one ever played before.
that's crazy.
And also about stuff in general. One of the notes, it's funny, they never had a singer except when a singer would sit in, like a Patty Austin would sit in,
Right.
or like a Joe Cocker, like I said. I called them the singer's best friend
Mm,
because they knew how to stay out of the way of.
right.
They had respect for what was going on top,
Right.
and what was happening with them was just like the gears.
Right.
The gears were
Right.
happening, and yeah, it's like they never. It's as forceful as they all were. They were forceful players.
Right.
And yet, in a bizarre way, they never called attention to themselves because
Mm,
they didn't have to.
right.
Just like any great artist didn't
Mm,
have to call attention to themselves. Just their being
right.
got your attention.
Yeah. 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 I get it. I get it. That's very, very, that's pretty profound what you said right there, because that's really, that sums it up. How they approached playing behind uh whoever was in front. It didn't really matter. Like, for them, it didn't matter whether it was instrumental, whether it was vocal. They had this idea of what should happen in the background, right? And they were accomplished enough to make that happen together as a unit.
Yeah.
That's just no, as a
And
like communal thing, so to speak.
absolutely. And like every rule was, like they say, rules are made to be broken. It's not that they broke every rule, but they redefined every rule. It's like they
Mm,
redefined the thing of like, you could play soft and
mm.
forcefully. You didn't have to play loud to be forceful.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah, yeah,
rule.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
oh, the other thing that's said a lot about stuff is there were times when they would just hit a vamp and no one was soloing. And what it was the rhythm section as solo, the rhythm
Mm,
section as focus. That's
mm,
what it was. And they could do that for 5 minutes.
yeah,
And it felt so good. And you were just in your seat going like this. You couldn't believe how good it felt.
right.
And in any other situation, somebody would look around, but never with stuff. Somebody would look around and say, who's blowing? Who's solo? Is it my turn? Should I solo? Should I solo?
Yeah,
Mm-mm. They had the confidence to
just sit in it. Yeah, yeah.
just that. And
No, that's pretty deep, and I mean that it's also interesting that kind of went into the next generation that happened after them. That kind of went into a Buddy Williams. It went into a Marcus Miller, right? It went into a Dave Sanborn, right? It went into a Clifford Carter. You know what I mean?
yes,
It
absolutely,
went into a Steve Jordan. That,
absolutely.
like, all of these players kind of, that same the definition that stuff sort of came up with, and the re-evaluation of that definition of what it means to be in the pocket or groove or whatever you want to call it, right? All of that moved on into the next generation, and inspired the next generation, and kind of became the template for them, right? And when you hear them now, there's an interesting thing that I try to sort of make clear, to clarify in the live video. Like, there are several bands that like you following stuff. I followed Hiram Bullock's band, right? Hiram Bullock's trio, right? And I went to every place they played, with Will and Clint again, everywhere they played, I was there, right? If I could make it. And the other band that I followed was Tofi and the Pussycats,
Great.
right?
Yeah.
And that was Chris Carter,
Yeah.
right? And it was like, okay, this is how it's supposed to sound. That was kind of the feeling that I got from it. And it didn't matter, it was Metropolitan Cafe, the 55 bar, it didn't matter where they were. I remember seeing them, I think Kenny's Castaways, like it didn't matter to me anymore. Like, it was completely, the place was completely secondary. The important thing was those bands were playing, right? And that stuff sound, once again, that stuff pocket, especially with Tofi and the Pussycats, it was just unmistakable. It was, and I mean, that's Chris Parker. It's kind of, one of the unsung heroes of New York's music scene. But definitely it was there.
Also, now you brought up Chris, is another funny thing. I remember Chris saying, and yeah, so my friend Howie, who I've mentioned a bunch of times already, he had the car, and we would drive Cornell home after, like, we would stay until the bitter end,
Of course.
Cornell. So we'd like just hanging and just, talking to Cornell, and not about music things, about other things,
Everything, yeah.
And then, like, rather than have him take a taxi, Howie would say, and Howie had like a beat up, Dodge Dart with like a million, it's like, he tried to clean it up a little bit.
It was already alive inside.
And we would, at Cornell was living on Park Avenue, I don't remember exactly, in the 80s or something, or 60s. And we would give him a ride home. And like, to be in a car with him was golden for, like, for the 7 minutes driving across town.
Yeah.
But I remember Christopher, sometimes Howie would say to Chris, "You want me to give you a ride home?" Chris lived down on Canal Street in a loft, like early loft dweller.
Oh, wow.
And Chris would say no. Chris would sometimes walk home after the gig from 97th Street. And he said this, he never said to me, he said to Howie, and that's like a 5-mile walk. He would walk home because of what happened musically for the last 3 or 4 hours. He needed to walk it off.
Yeah. I don't doubt it. That makes a lot of sense to me. It's, of course. Everything, your entire nervous system is so charged at that point that you can't just like the situation, like sometimes with the gig that we're doing, right, with musical theater gigs, very often you have these situations where the show ends and then there's like the run to the door, right? And I'm terrible at it. Like, I'm not wired that way, right? So with me, it just doesn't work that way. But it's also that I need to calm down, right? I cannot possibly drop everything, put the coat on, put the shoes on, and catch, know when, like, you're really good at that because you know when the subways are coming. I mean, for me, it's impossible to keep all of that together after playing, for 2.5 hours. It just doesn't work that way. So I totally get it. Your nervous system is totally charged. Adrenaline is flowing through your body, and you need to walk it off. I get it.
I agree with what you just said, actually, even though I don't always live it. But that is one of the great things. I'm going to talk about Ain't Too Proud in the present tense.
Oh, yeah.
because I think the show is important and it'll be there when this madness ends.
Oh yeah.
But that is one of the great features, is that if you wanted to hang, there were people hanging, because I
Yeah.
have been in those theatrical situations where if you come out 45 seconds after the thing ends,
Yeah.
everybody's gone. You're
Everybody.
like the loneliest guy in town. Nothing's happening. But mostly because of our string players or other people who are party animals, now getting in trouble.
That's funny.
You could hang and you could
Yeah.
have
Yeah. Yeah.
drink
Yeah.
whatever you want to do.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
yeah, so that's Chris walk home. Yeah, in terms of rhythm section stuff, I can't state it strongly enough. It's like, for rhythm section players, that thing of stuff is it's the unbeatable gold standard.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I
No
don't even want
doubt.
to call it a template, because a template makes it sound like, oh, I could trace it, I could do it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was a template too. But it's an incredible gold standard.
Mm.
And if you, as a rhythm section player, whatever instrument you're on, if you just follow the rules of those guys,
Mm.
you will have musical success. I don't mean business success necessarily.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. But and you probably have some business success too, because people will, why were these guys constantly doing a million sessions? It's because they were great to be around, and they were serious cats who showed up to play.
Yeah.
But
Their
they
stuff sold. Let's not forget that. Like
yes,
their input, their stuff, no pun intended,
yeah,
their stuff sold.
yeah,
It sold records. It hit the nerve of whoever was listening to it, and it made records, and people were like, I want that feeling in my environment, right? I want that record, because that it made me feel a certain way when I heard it on the radio. Now I want it at home, right?
Well, isn't that what it is? I mean, like, people, say, and I'm no, scholarly person in this, but people say, well, what's art? Art is to make you feel something.
Yeah,
you know
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
No,
like, some people look at the statue of David and they feel something, or the Mona Lisa, or whatever it is,
yeah,
or something. But yeah, I mean, if you don't feel something from
stuff.
stuff, then check your pulse,
Yeah,
and and check yourself in immediately to the nearest emergency room, and you're in big trouble, and
you're in big trouble. Exactly.
you might not have long to be around here. But
Well, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
and just in terms of, like, that quote I read from Edwards about the space, the way they all left space, and the way, I mean, I learned so much about that from Eric, and
Hmm.
from Cornell. And so to this day, I wish I had more chops. I wish I had listened to that guy,
Mm, mm, mm.
instead of that guy.
Right, right,
But
right, right.
but you know what? I think we gravitate. I'm not a shredder, but I
Right.
think we gravitate. Though I appreciate it, but I think we gravitate towards what we love.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah, for sure.
if the shredder spoke to me, I probably would have sat at home 8 hours a day shredding with two hands. But
Yeah,
what spoke to me was Cornell going, and
right.
the thing also about Cornell is, that I think I learned from him, hopefully, that I also affects my playing in my life, is I know that when he was playing a solo, he was singing the melody of, he didn't have to play the melody of the song. He didn't play solos like that generally, mostly
Right.
not, but he had the phrasing
Mm.
and the spirit of the song in his head.
Oh yeah.
So it wasn't just a generic solo that he could plug in any place. It was a specific solo for All the King's Horses. It was a specific solo for Daydream, and it was a
Right.
specific thing for Rock Steady. It was,
Right.
and that just speaks to me. I don't know what else.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get it. I get it. And that's putting it very, very beautifully. That speaks to you because, again, like, the one thing that just, you just said it in terms of people perceiving art as, what speaks to them. Good art, or art in general, is a means of communication on mostly an emotional field, right? It can be intellectually, of course, but it's mostly emotional. It's a way of communicating on an emotional level, right? And uh, they manage to do that in the field of an artistic endeavor, which happened to be music, right? Because they weren't. I mean, Chris Parker is a painter as well, but in that particular band, it just happened to be music where they communicated with that, and we communicated on that level, and intended and I mean what I say. Like, people heard it, and it made them feel good. Like, the communication went in, right? Made them feel good, and they were like, I want that in my life, on my turntable, in my whatever 8-track, in my cassette tape, and then fast forward into now on my CD, in my MP3 collection, whatever, right? So that's yeah, it's a means to communicate uh, emotions and perhaps even memories, that are always sort of linked with emotions. But they managed to get that out, right, and in an unmistakable way. There's just no two ways about that.
Yeah, and like any great band, it's like the chemistry
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the unique talents of,
yeah,
and there wasn't this you know, to say wasn't a weak link is ridiculous.
yeah,
This was the world's strongest links,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and
No, no doubt, no doubt.
on a personal note, so I got to I got to play with Gordon at
Mm,
Creole, and the way that came to pass briefly was Frank Canino put together, we had a Stuff tribute band
mm-hmm.
with Clint Gannon and Chris Parker,
Right, the Stuff Brothers.
Stuff Brothers, and Gordon came to see us.
Mm.
And it was like one of the greatest nights of my life to like watch Gordon out there in the bitter end.
Mm.
And I went up to him
I
afterwards.
saw you guys. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember that. I saw you guys a bunch of times. Yeah.
I'm not clear if like Gordon even knew, put together. This is the guy who was at McKell's a million times. He may have or he may have not. I don't really know.
Mm.
But I went up to him after we played and I said, what'd you think? And he looked up at me and he said, "You guys fucked me up." and I just said,
"Thank you."
The highest praise I've ever gotten in my life. So then Mick Gaffney, who's been playing with the versions of Stuff, past Stuff, guitar player, who's very, very excellent. I love his playing. He had a conflict and he couldn't play Creole, so he went to Gordon and he said, I have a conflict and I want to know if I could send in a sub. I'm sure they didn't love having subs. But Gordon said to him, and this was like shortly after Gordon came to the bitter end to see the Stuff Brothers, Gordon said, "That's okay." He said, get me one of those guys in the Stuff Brothers. He said, I don't care which one. He said, but just get me one of the two guys. So Mick called me up and he said, I flipped a coin and it came up Saltzman. He said, I'll call Gary for the next one. I know you both want to do it. And I, so I went down to Creole and played and I had the best time
Yeah. No, that's deep. That's deep. You get to play with your hero. I mean, that's as good as it gets, pretty much.
When I was a teenager, there would be a thing where sometimes at McKell's, because sometimes when these guys were doing sessions, their sessions would go overtime. So sometimes they would show up with like a small crew for the first set. And what could that be? All of a sudden, like it's a piano trio of T and Gordon and Chris, right?
Yeah.
And then the guitar players came in. They were working. Very rarely, sometimes Gordon wasn't there, and Will would play. So Gordon must have called Will and said, "Will, could you go to McKell?" Will knew the repertoire. Right. Will, could you go and play the first set? So sometimes that would happen. And there was a period when it must have been Cornell and Eric must have been on a album together because they were late every night and they missed the first set. And like we got wind of this, and one of the people that I drove in from Queens said, "Larry, you gotta bring your guitar in," and I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm not bringing it into the club." I said, "But meaning if they don't play, you should sit in, right?
Right,
Because
right,
somebody
right,
sat in. Elliot Randall sat in. This one
right.
sat in. That one sat in. And I put the guitar in the trunk, and we get there, and sure enough, there's no guitar players, and my
Mm.
friends are all like, "Go get the guitar, get the guitar, get the guitar." Now I was like 19 years old, and I knew the repertoire too, but I wisely, I think, wisely,
You're
just
like,
said,
I'm not touching that.
I'm not, you know. So it's kind of a beautiful full circle
Oh
experience
yeah, oh yeah,
much
yeah, yeah.
later in life to play for Gordon.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. How awesome is that? How awesome is that? Well, listen, Larry Saltzman, we could
yeah, we,
continue for hours. There's no doubt about that. Nevertheless, I do want to bring this to a close and,
yeah,
and let you know how much I appreciate your insight and your perspective on this, particular subject, because it needs to be heard, right? And I know that there are many people out there who have the same experiences that you had with stuff, I had with Hiram's trio, and with Tofi. People follow Wayne Krantz around. Like people follow Mike Stern to every gig. I get that, and I'm there as well. People had that same, like, people have those experiences, and it's important to to hear that you're not alone. Number one. And that perhaps it doesn't really matter what the genre, what the artist is, or whatever, but it's like that kind of enthusiasm, right? That um, following your favorite artist brings, right? That enthusiasm informs your playing, right? And that's what people hear when they hear Larry Saltzman play. Hopefully that's what they hear when they hear George Farmer play. But it's like, in martial arts, there's this one thing where you learn how to protect yourself, you learn how to fight, but then on the other hand, you also learn how to heal. It's two sides of the same coin, right? So that I see that enthusiasm as two sides of the same coin, right? On the one hand, you're the player, but on the other hand, you're also the fan. You see what I'm saying? And that's why I think these, and your perspective and your reminiscing and also bringing it into the contemporary, is so important, and realizing that, oh yeah, that enthusiasm, that's still there, and it comes through when you end up playing. So I want to say many thanks to you, Larry. I really appreciate you being here today. And make sure that you continue to stay safe out there and stay sane and whatnot. And hopefully in a couple months, we'll have an update.
yeah, yeah.
Like
This
we've
is,
had like many of this at this point.
yeah, this has been a complete pleasure, George,
Oh,
and an
same
honor
here.
also to hang with you and talk about this subject, obviously close to both of our hearts.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
I
no doubt.
thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend time in this world.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, we wouldn't have it without you. All right, Larry Saltzman, thank you so much. Stay safe out there.